Hi friends, it's design team member Walter here with a video featuring 4 cards that I created using the August 2025 Under the Sea card kit. This kit is full of bright colors, lots of texture, and really great ephemera. If you like the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and consider following me across social platforms. The design for this first card was inspired by the idea of a net being thrown into the ocean and hauling up lots of beautiful treasure from underneath the waves. I used elements from the Background Builder 1 set as well as Background Builder 2. They're both available on the Love from Lizi website and have so many great elements to enhance your cards. As you can see, I created a frame using some of the green paper that would be set against the beautiful underwater background paper. And in that, I have a net that I created using the really fun netting ribbon from the kit. And I'm going to have that go down into the water and pull up lots of fun items. To make the net, I used an element from Background Builder 2, cut it out, and then used some of the cording from the kit, ran it around and through the top of the cutout, and then tied some knots to make it look as though it's closed. I ended up tying a couple of knots just to make sure that it was going to be secure and that the string wouldn't come loose. I then decided how I was going to place the treasure being brought up from the ocean. There's some shells, there's a pearl, there's a starfish, all of the ephemera that comes in the kit. And once I was happy with the placement, I wanted to make sure that the net would fit over it. Happy with how it looked, I added some glue around the edges of the netting and adhered it down onto the card panel. I ran my fingers around the edges a few times, pressing down to make sure that it was going to be nicely secured. I then put a couple of dabs of glue up at the top of the card panel and pressed the cording into place to make sure that each of those pieces were secured to the card panel. I applied pressure for just a couple of seconds on each to make sure that it was going to stick. I then flipped over my green frame and adhered the pieces of coral ephemera to the back of it using just a little bit of craft glue. I wanted to make sure that there was a piece of coral on one side, one corner of the frame as well as the other, just for some symmetry. I then took some double-sided foam tape strips and adhered them around the back of the frame to make sure that there was some dimension and that everything wouldn't be resting against the card panel. What I like about this frame is that once it's adhered down, it acts as a frame, but it also kind of makes it look like a Polaroid picture, which I think is a really cool effect. And you want to make sure to have enough of the double-sided foam tape down so that the panel, the frame doesn't separate from the card panel. I then lined it up and adhered it into place. And I applied a little bit of pressure around the edges to make sure that it was securely adhered, and then used my scissors to snip off the ends of the netting rope. I put double-sided adhesive onto the back of the combined card panel and adhered it down to my card base. The card panel was cut down to be a total in size of 4 inches by 5.25 inches so that it centers nicely on an A2 card base. I then automatically reached for my Love from Lizi peel-offs and decided which colors I wanted to use on the card. I went with a really nice metallic aqua that brings out colors from the background paper. Really rich blue, green, and it just adds a nice amount of shine. I adhered it down on one side, kind of centering it between the cutout area and the edge of the card panel, and then repeated that for the remaining sides. Once that was done, I reached for my giant clamshell and put some craft glue onto the back of it and centered it between the two pieces of coral down in the front. I then grabbed the beautiful metallic gold peel-offs and I took some of the thinner strips and ran them along each side of the cutout area. These are a lot thinner than the strips on the outside of the card, and I think that the gold and the aqua together just, number one, look really great, but two, the gold, there are also gold bubbles in the background paper used, and so that just helps to coordinate and bring out that gold element from the paper that was used. I lay them down by just aligning the edge to the next edge, usually doing the longer sides first and then doing the shorter sides. These Love from Lizi peel-off strips are such an easy way to elevate your design and to also kind of bring together all of the straight lines that are in this particular design. I used the small rectangular die from Background Builder 2 to cut out a piece of cardstock, the same cardstock that is in the background, and then went ahead and stamped my sentiment onto it with black ink. I put some craft glue onto the back of that sentiment strip and adhered it down onto my panel. And I decided to further enhance that strip by adding some thin gold peel-off strips around the shape. This really helps to coordinate it with the gold that is above it. And after completing one side, I repeated this for the other 3 sides. And with that, the card is complete. This second card has a very pretty classic design that includes a lot of heat embossing. I started by taking the larger scalloped edged die from Background Builder 2 and running it on each side of a card panel that was cut down to 4 inches by 5.25 inches. I simply ran it through on one side, removed the die, placed it on the other side, and ran it through again. I was now ready for some heat embossing. I took my anti-static tool and ran it over the card panel to ensure that the embossing powder would only stick where I want it to. I then used my stamping platform, the sand dollar stamp, and some clear embossing ink to randomly stamp sand dollars around the panel. There was no rhyme or reason to where I was placing the sand dollars, just placing them here and there where I thought that they would randomly look good. However, if you're someone that likes to keep things symmetrical, you could certainly use your platform to make sure that they're aligned in places where you want them or in a pattern that you like. Once it was all stamped, I dusted it with some gold embossing powder. And then I flipped it over and tapped off the excess. I then took a light mint green card panel that was 4.25 inches by 5.5 inches, ran the clear embossing ink pad around the edges, and then adhered some gold embossing powder to those areas. And then I turned on my heat tool and let it do its magic, setting that embossing powder in place. I did the sand dollars first. And then moved on to the panel with the embossing powder around the edges. As you can see, I think it looks really nice when you center the panel with the sand dollars onto the green panel. You only see a little bit of the green peeking through, but I think it's a really pretty look. I adhered those two panels together and then put some double-sided adhesive onto the back of the combined panel and put it onto my card base. I used the little stitched rectangle die from Background Builder 2, cut out a piece of cardstock to create a sentiment strip, stamped it, added some embossing powder, heat set it, and went ahead and adhered it down to my card. I also glued down a piece of the coral ephemera to the center bottom of the card panel. I then took a gold metallic pigment ink pad and ran it around the edges of the card base just to add a little bit of extra gold in there and to not make it look so clean. With that done, I adhered 3 gold gems down onto the card. I then used a gold metallic gel pen to trace around the outside edges of the piece of coral ephemera that I adhered to the panel. I did this to help highlight the gold in the card, but also to further connect this piece of ephemera to the overall design that included lots of gold. And card number 2 is complete. Card 3 is definitely the most fun design. I cut a 2-inch strip of the gold sandy looking cardstock and then covered it with some craft glue. I made sure to have a pretty even and generous amount of glue on the cardstock. I then cut a strip of the beautiful shimmery mermaid tail fabric that was in the kit and adhered it down onto that strip of the gold cardstock. I put some double-sided tape onto the back to be able to flip the fabric over and further secure it into place. Once it was dry, I took the seahorse die from the kit and cut it out of the combined piece of cardstock. I ran it through several times since it's a rather intricate die. Once done, I went ahead and weeded out the pieces that I didn't want in there, and then used my detail scissors to fussy cut the seahorse. While cutting, I left just a very thin border around the outside of the seahorse. You can go as close or leave as generous a border as you'd like. I then took a piece of white cardstock and put some clear embossing ink onto the panel, and then used some of the salvaged patina distress glaze and sprinkled it onto the cardstock. I did this a couple of times just to make sure that I was happy with the coverage. And I then heat set it. What I love about this glaze is it looks different than embossing powder and truly looks like a very shiny glaze was put onto the cardstock. I put some craft glue onto the back of the seahorse. This isn't as tedious as you'd think. Yes, there are a lot of small spaces, but you don't need a ton of glue, and you can just make sure that you're hitting all the right places to adhere it down. I find that a fine tip on your glue definitely makes this easier, and it allows you to glide over each of those smaller areas to ensure that at least there's just a little bit of glue there. I also find that playing some good music in the background and singing along helps to make this process go a lot quicker. I then adhered the seahorse down onto that glaze embossed paper and used my detail scissors to fussy cut out the seahorse. Look at how pretty and shiny it is. I absolutely love it. I then used the fish dies from the kit and cut out two fish from that glazed cardstock and cut another strip of that sandy gold paper. Used craft glue to adhere the fish down onto the paper, and I then fussy cut them out. For the cutting, I just stayed as close to the edge of the fish as I could. And I used gold gems to create eyes for the fish and the seahorse. I used clear embossing ink to stamp the coral stamp onto my card panel, and then used some rusty hinge distress glaze to bring the coral to life. As you heat set it, it just turns into a nice rusty colored glaze and lays there at the bottom of the ocean. I used double-sided tape to adhere that card panel down onto my card base. And I then adhered the seahorse down onto the card using double-sided foam tape strips, and did the same with both fish. I also used black ink and one of the sentiment stamps to go ahead and get the sentiment stamped onto the card panel. And with that, our third card is done. The fourth card is definitely bright and flashy and shiny. It's not my usual style, but I decided to try something different and I ended up really liking it. I used the herringbone panel die, which has quickly become one of my favorites, and some silver mirror cardstock to create a frame for the card. This die cuts really nicely, so just run it through and you're all set. I cut a piece of the colorful and shimmery mermaid scale fabric to the approximate size of the frame and set it aside. I then went ahead and took all of the pieces out of the frame to get it ready. I then put some craft glue onto the back of the frame and then adhered the frame down onto the piece of fabric. I used a rag to press it down and to help absorb any glue that may leak out from underneath the frame, and then also ran the rag over the mirrored cardstock to make sure that any glue that got on there was rubbed off. I then took the inside pieces from the die cut and started to adhere them into place. This is an optional step. I decided I wanted them in my design, but I could have very easily left them out. While there's quite a few of them, I find that it doesn't really take long because you're just putting some glue on and then sticking it down into place. Once that was done, I used my detail scissors to trim off any of the excess fabric from around the card panel. Once again, having some good music in the background definitely helps this go by a lot more quickly. I then put some double-sided tape onto the back of that panel and adhered it down to my card base. You could use craft glue instead if you'd like, but I chose to use the tape. I really love the way that the shine of that mirror cardstock um, is set against the shimmer from that beautiful fabric. I used the scalloped circle die from Background Builder 2 to cut out a piece of cardstock to stamp my sentiment onto. I stamped it on with black ink, and I also cut out the base of that die from some more of the silver mirrored cardstock, and I used glue to glue the sentiment circle into the center of that die cut. I applied some double-sided foam tape onto the back of it and then adhered it down to the card. I used some super glue to glue down one of the silver turtle charms to the sentiment circle. And then some craft glue to adhere three of these really pretty green gems down onto the card as well. The final step was I took the wooden seashell from the kit, colored it with a silver metallic marker, and then put some super glue on the back and adhered it to the card base. For a little extra pizzazz, I put some glossy accents over the top of that seashell so that when it dried, it really has a beautiful shine to it. I just made sure to spread a pretty even coat of the glossy accents all around it, even getting down into each of the etched lines in the shell. Card 4 is complete. To recap, here are the 4 cards that we created. This first one that is a really fun underwater scene of a net that's picking up some treasure from the ocean. We have a starfish and some shells and a pearl. And it's surrounded by some coral and a shell. I added in some of the gold peel-offs and the teal peel-offs to coordinate and really pull out those colors from that printed paper on the background, saying, "Can't wait to see you." This next card is actually, I think it may be my favorite out of this batch. It has the gold embossed sand dollars on that really clean and simple paper with the white and just some of the turquoise and the gold. I then put it onto a panel that I just randomly had put some embossing ink and then sprinkled some gold embossing powder. You can still see some of the green in back of it, but really a fun design. Our third card, which has this beautiful seahorse that was made using the mermaid tail fabric and a piece of the cardstock, the patterned cardstock. And then that is set against the turquoise embossing powder that was heat set and then fussy cut out the seahorse as well as the 2 fish. We have a mermaid tail there, and the skeleton of the fish actually kind of makes a nice plant coming up from the bottom. And don't forget the heat embossed seaweed in the back. That one saying "seize the day." And then finally, we have this really shiny and pretty card that uses the mirrored cardstock, the silver mirrored cardstock, as well as that mermaid scale fabric. Used one of the cover dies that are available on the Love from Lizi website. Our sentiment has the silver turtle charm on it. Use those beautiful green tiger eyes. And then finally, the final accent was this shell that I had covered with a silver metallic pen, glued on, and then put some glossy accents over the top to really make it shine. So 4 really fun designs. I hope you enjoy them, and I will see you again real soon. Until then, be well.